In my family, growing up, Lent was always an important time of the year. For us, it was a time of talking. We talked about our mistakes. We talked about our hopes. We talked about our ideas about the spiritual world. The most important day of Lent was always Good Friday. On that day, we would fast, we would talk about preparing for Easter, and we would talk about preparing our minds and hearts for Jesus. But 1 year, exactly 20 years ago, I completely forgot. I woke up that Friday morning like it was any other Friday. I made myself breakfast, which is a no-no on Good Friday. I drank a glass of water. I prepared myself to go to school. I lived in a small rural community about 35 miles south of where I went to school. And I drove a big forest green GMC Yukon truck, if you can imagine. As I turned the corner from the small desert road that I lived on, I saw people walking along the road. Now, this was not a normal sight where I grew up. We didn't have sidewalks like you do here, and it was more common to see people riding their horses or ATVs to work than it was to see anyone walking, especially in the pre-dawn hours as I was driving. I saw more and more people as I drove. Some were barefoot. Some held crosses. Some walked in groups or as families. Others held out their hands in front of them as in prayer. Now, it wasn't long before I realized what I had done. These people walking were pilgrims, headed to Tome Hill, a pilgrimage site near where I lived, and the day I forgot was Good Friday. I was so embarrassed. You see, less than 5 miles away from this small desert town where I grew up was a long dormant volcano. It had been a holy site of power for the communities and pueblos in the area for hundreds of years before European colonization. For hundreds of years after European colonization, the Catholics had installed large crosses, 12-foot crosses on top. And since the 16th, 17th century, it had been a Catholic pilgrimage site where people went to pay their respects and honor the day of Jesus' death. And I forgot all about it. As I drove, I kept my speed low because ours was not a culture of pedestrians, and I was afraid that they wouldn't know how fast I was going, or I would not respond quickly if something happened. The trickle of pilgrims walking grew, and eventually there were crowds walking by the side of the road, headed back to the dormant volcano near where I grew up. Seeing this beautiful, intentional sight, hundreds of people walking, some barefoot, was moving and brought me to tears as I drove. I was perhaps made more emotional by the sense of guilt I felt, neglecting the high holidays of my tradition. As the tears streamed down my face, I admired the men, women, and children who lived out their faith with their bodies. I eventually made it to school, and even now today, I remember the sense of reverence that stuck with me the whole day. I can remember no season of Lent before that or since that was more spiritually lifting or grounding for me than the year I forgot Good Friday.